A young girl of 16 rode her bicycle home and mysteriously disappeared. The next day, her lifeless body was found in a field near the road. The unknown criminal had taken her life and fled the scene. Despite having a DNA sample of the culprit, the authorities struggled to track him down until 13 years later. This documentary will explore the tragic tale of Marian Woudstra and shed light on why this murder continues to be a notorious chapter in Dutch history. Marian Woudstra was born in the Netherlands on August 10, 1982. She resided in De Westereen, a small village in the northern part of the country, far from major cities. The youngest of 6 siblings, Marianne had 2 brothers and 3 sisters. As her older siblings gradually moved away to other cities and countries, she remained with her parents and 1 older brother. Marianne attended the local school, enjoyed music, and had a wide circle of friends. The region she lived in was characterized by small towns and settlements scattered a few kilometers apart. Consequently, Marianne frequently visited neighboring areas to socialize with friends or shop. In her spare time, she worked part-time at the local supermarket. On April 30, 1999, the nation celebrated Queen's Day. After finishing her shift, Marianne went to Colombie, a nearby town, to spend the evening with friends at a local cafe. Later, her boyfriend and his friends joined the group and they all decided to cycle to Boijel Post, a settlement 6 kilometers away. Mary and borrowed a bicycle since she didn't have one of her own. When they decided to head back, she set off towards her hometown, which was approximately 11 kilometers away. Unfortunately, she never arrived. Initially, her parents assumed she had stayed over at a friend's place in Colum, but this assumption was soon dispelled. Marianne had promised to return home that evening, and if she had planned to stay elsewhere, she would have informed her family. Concerned, Marianne's father contacted her best friend, AFI, only to learn that Marianne had bid her farewell that night and left for home. It became evident to everyone that something untoward might have befallen Marianne. Her friend contacted her boyfriend and brought her sister along, driving together along the route Marianne usually took home. Meanwhile, the young woman's father made the decision to immediately inform the police. He informed them that his daughter had not returned home and none of her friends had any information on her whereabouts. Shortly after, 2 officers arrived to file a missing persons report, then headed back to the station to initiate the search. Meanwhile, AFI, her sister and boyfriend were driving close to the settlement of Finkleister, surrounded by vast fields. They spotted something shiny in the grass and stopped to investigate. As they approached, they discovered a bicycle lying in the grass. A short distance away, approximately 15 meters, they found Marianne's lifeless body. She was unclothed with a cut on her neck. The trio was deeply shocked. Affie attempted to check Marianne's pulse, but couldn't bring herself to get closer to the body. It was evident that the young woman had passed away, but her best friend was in disbelief due to the overwhelming shock. She struggled to dial the police on her phone. Multiple officers arrived promptly, with 2 officers heading to Marianne's family home. At that point, the victim's identity had not been officially confirmed, so the officers picked up her father and took him to the scene. Forensic experts were already present, and the father sadly recognized Marianne immediately. Upon examining the area, the detectives noticed a crucial detail. There were 2 bicycle tracks leading from the road to where the young woman's body was found, and only 1 track going in the opposite direction. This indicated that the perpetrator was also on a bicycle. The police scoured the vicinity for evidence, even utilizing aerial photography. But the only item discovered near the crime scene was a lighter. Marianne's friend confirmed that she neither smoked nor owned a lighter, prompting the police to send it to the lab for analysis. The medical examiners concluded that the young woman had suffered abuse and discovered traces of semen which allowed them to create a DNA sample of the killer. This same DNA was detected on the lighter. Despite uploading it to the police database, no matches were found, indicating that the perpetrator had no prior criminal history. Shortly after the body was discovered, Marianne's boyfriend, Spencer, was singled out as a suspect by the local police department head, even though there was no evidence against him. However, the young man willingly provided his DNA sample, which did not match the one found on the victim. The crime received extensive coverage in the local media and on television, as such incidents were rare in the peaceful area, prompting public pressure on the police to apprehend the culprit swiftly. Despite having the killer's DNA sample within the first week, the detectives were at a standstill with no suspects. Numerous calls from local residents suggested potential suspects, but none of these theories were confirmed. The majority of people pointed towards a specific location near where Marianne's body was discovered, a migration center for asylum seekers, mainly from Iran and Syria. This theory gained traction in the local towns, leading many to believe that a refugee was responsible for the murder. Consequently, the police had to explore this lead. Marianne's funeral on May 5th drew around 1,500 people, with many coming from neighboring communities to support her family. 2 days later, her parents organized a memorial procession, concluding with an address to the public. Approximately 20,000 individuals participated in the event, largely due to the extensive national media coverage of the case. The police received an increasing number of contacts each day, and eventually the detectives received a promising lead. Multiple individuals reported seeing Marianne at a cafe one evening, where she was approached by a man of Oriental appearance who attempted to engage her in conversation. When the young woman declined, the man made a threatening gesture towards her by running his thumb along his throat. Given that the young woman was killed in a similar manner, the police immediately launched a search for the young man. It was later discovered that he was a 15-year-old refugee from the same migration center. Although he admitted to making the gesture, he denied any involvement in the murder. Despite providing a DNA sample that did not match the one found on the victim's body, local residents continued to blame the refugees from the migration center. This led to the organization having to hire additional security guards to prevent potential conflicts. 12 days after the murder, people gathered at the migration center to protest. Initially, they demanded the release of the murderer, but the situation escalated by evening. Some individuals even threw Molotov cocktails towards the building, prompting police intervention. Since then, security at the center has been significantly increased, and there have been no further demonstrations of this nature. A few days later, the police announced the arrest of a 32-year-old man who resided in the same town as Marianne. He was known as a local alcoholic and was generally disliked by most residents. The arrest was made after a witness came forward claiming to have seen the man in bloody clothes on the night of the murder. However, the man's DNA did not match the sample. The witness admitted to fabricating the entire story out of personal animosity towards the man. Upon discovering a potential link to the immigration center, law enforcement officials initiated an examination of the logbook documenting the movements of refugees from the asylum area. While refugees had the right to depart from the center, they were required to log their destination and purpose. It was revealed that 2 refugees, a 26-year-old and a 19-year-old, had left the center on the night of the murder without specifying their whereabouts. Authorities began investigating their potential involvement but withheld specific details for an extended period. The victim's father expressed dissatisfaction with the lack of information provided by investigators and the failure to apprehend the perpetrator. Subsequently, he sought the assistance of a renowned crime journalist to shed light on the case. On July 1st, the victim's father appeared on a popular television show to disclose the journalist's findings. It was revealed that the 2 refugees who left the center on the night of the murder were seen at the same cafe as the victim and departed shortly after she left with her friends. Furthermore, their whereabouts remained unknown since that night, as they did not return to the center and could not be located by the authorities. Despite having photographs of the suspects, the police had not released them for unknown reasons. Following the public disclosure of these details on television, law enforcement announced that they were collaborating with Interpol to locate the suspects, with the prevailing belief being that they may have fled the country. These developments reignited tensions between local residents and refugees, leading to protests outside the center in early October. On October 9th, Turkish authorities reported the arrest of one of the suspects who had been residing in Istanbul all along. He was extradited to the Netherlands, where a DNA sample was obtained and necessary tests were conducted. The sample found on the victim's body did not match the man, leading to his exoneration. The investigation hit a dead end once again and suspicions turned back to her boyfriend, despite his DNA not being a match. Spencer's behavior raised eyebrows. Marianne's acquaintances and family were convinced she would never ride her bike home at night due to her fear of the dark, and the distance was considerable. It was common knowledge that Spencer should have driven her home, even according to Marianne's parents. Instead, he allowed her to ride her bike alone. Spencer was interrogated multiple times, and something peculiar began to emerge. He changed his story about that evening several times. Initially, Spencer claimed he met Marianne at a cafe and they drove to the Boughton Post. However, he later stated that she had gone there with friends before he even arrived at the cafe. He then claimed he went to her on his bicycle. He also mentioned seeing two men walking with a bicycle on the way there, initially saying he didn't recognize them due to the darkness, but later claiming they were his friends. Despite the oddities, the police lacked evidence against Spencer, and his DNA did not match the killer's sample. The case remained at a standstill for several more months. On December 20th, the authorities sought the public's help and requested DNA samples from all men in the area. However, they encountered a setback. It was discovered that the law prohibited the mass collection of DNA from citizens, even with their consent. The police were limited to taking only 150 samples, none of which yielded a match. From that point on, the case essentially ground to a halt for several years. Marianne's parents attempted to advocate for a change in the law to allow extensive DNA screening, but their efforts were rebuffed. The decision was made to safeguard individuals despite the fact that similar measures had resulted in the apprehension of the culprit multiple times in other nations. In July 2001, law enforcement officials released a rough description of the suspect, believing that the perpetrator was a local man aged between 20 and 40. Despite repeated requests, authorities were denied permission to carry out a large-scale DNA collection within a 5-kilometer radius of the crime scene, leading to a standstill in the case. The victim's parents continued to appear on television and grant interviews, but the case gradually lost public interest each year due to the lack of new evidence. In 2010, a specialized team utilized cutting-edge computer technology to create a detailed 3D model of the crime scene and all available evidence, reigniting public interest in the case. This prompted Marianne's parents to once again advocate for DNA screening. After 11 years, authorities finally considered amending the law, a process that took nearly 2 years and was completed on September 6, 2012. A press conference was held by the police, urging all men aged between 20 and 40 in 1999 to provide their DNA samples with a collection area limited to 5 kilometers. Approximately 8,000 men were estimated to be involved, but not all of them consented to provide their DNA. The police managed to collect just over 6,500 samples, which were then studied by experts. Due to limited resources, the lab could only process about 400 samples per week, resulting in a study period of up to 4 months. The experts did not solely seek a complete match with the perpetrator's DNA profile, as it was unlikely that the culprit would willingly provide his DNA to the authorities. The laboratory was also working on identifying similarities to establish kinship and trace back to the killer through a father, brother, or other relative. On November 19th, a month after the testing began, experts finally found a long-awaited match. Surprisingly, they not only discovered a familial connection but also obtained the DNA of the killer himself, indicating that he willingly provided it to the authorities. Detectives subsequently announced the apprehension of 45-year-old Jasper Steringa, a local farmer and father of 2, whose residence was just a few kilometers away from where Marianne was murdered. Jasper remained silent, but after consulting with his attorney, he opted to confess. However, the public only learned the specifics of this heinous crime on March 28, 2013, when the trial commenced. According to Jasper, on that fateful evening, he was completing tasks on his farm and decided to take a bicycle ride before retiring for the night. He admitted that riding his bicycle was often a pretext for his actual intentions, which involved seeking the company of local women in a neighboring village. Although his wife was unaware of his actions, he claimed in court that he had not intended to visit that night and had simply planned a ride to distract himself from family issues and farm challenges. Spotting Marianne alone on a desolate, dimly lit road, He seized the opportunity to act on his impulses. Jasper approached her, brandished a penknife, and threatened her into silence before leading her to a field where he committed unspeakable acts and ended her life. During the trial, he maintained that he had not intended to kill the young woman and had acted out of panic. Realizing the gravity of his actions and the repercussions for his family, particularly his young children aged 5 and 8 at the time, Jasper contemplated fleeing and taking Marianne's life to conceal his crime. However, guilt plagued him incessantly. He chose to remain in the vicinity, overhearing discussions about the crime and witnessing the impact on the family of the person he had harmed. Their lives were forever altered due to his atrocious actions. Despite contemplating surrendering to the authorities multiple times, he never reached a final decision. When a large-scale DNA testing initiative was introduced in 2012, Jasper understood that he would eventually be identified. With numerous relatives residing nearby, it was inevitable that one of them would provide his DNA. A partial match would be discovered by experts, prompting an investigation into all his family members, ultimately leading to his apprehension. Consequently, Jasper opted to submit his DNA, yet he struggled to muster the courage to visit the police station and admit his guilt. Following a brief trial, the judge delivered his verdict on April 19th, sentencing him to 18 years in prison out of a potential 20-year term as per Dutch law. After 13 years, Marianne's family finally witnessed the perpetrator facing consequences, although the legal system delivered an unwelcome surprise. Due to his exemplary conduct, Jasper is set to be released as early as 2024, having served less than a decade behind bars. Christina Rynneking earned the nickname Cricket from her family due to her petite stature. She was born in 1972 and resided in Kansas City, Kansas. Christina was married to Christopher Wayne Goodall, a professional roofer, and their relationship was filled with love and affection. In 1988, they joyfully welcomed their first child, April, into the world. 3 years later, their family grew with the arrival of their second daughter, Ashley. Unfortunately, Christopher's occupation couldn't adequately support their family, prompting Christina to seek alternative means of providing for them. Sources indicate that she began soliciting clients for financial assistance in an area known as Central Street, offering escort services. Tragically, Christopher found himself incarcerated at some point, leaving Christina feeling hopeless. Despite the societal label she carried, those who knew her believed she was genuinely a good-hearted individual. However, circumstances forced her into a life on the streets, where she faced the harsh realities of a world that often failed to recognize the humanity behind such labels. Christina experienced a brief period of incarceration, but her recent release from prison marked a somber chapter in her life. Unfortunately, the day after her release would be her last. In 1998, April, who was in 5th grade and celebrating her 10th Christmas, received devastating news. On Christmas morning, a group of boys scavenging for scrap metal in the driveway of an abandoned nursing home made a horrifying discovery. They stumbled upon a partially unclothed body bearing signs of severe beatings and abandonment. The victim had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, with her pants partially pulled down. Nearby, her bra, shoes, and personal belongings were scattered. The victim's face had been brutally disfigured, leaving a gruesome scene. The Kansas City Police Department notified Christina's family, forever altering their lives. The victim was identified as 26-year-old Christina King, and the investigation into her tragic demise and the identity of her assailant began. Penny Barnett, the mother of Christina, consistently followed up with the KCPD in her quest for information. However, unbeknownst to Barnett, the police had actually obtained a lead: a used condom discovered at the crime scene alongside Christina's lifeless body. Unfortunately, there was a significant amount of negligence and incompetence on the part of the police, but I will delve into that later. On one occasion, during a phone call, Detective Terry Mass treated Penny Barnett so harshly that she ended up hanging up in tears. When her husband inquired about the reason behind her distress, she revealed that Detective Marst had been insensitive and had used inappropriate language when referring to Christina. The police displayed a clear bias against Christina, as they repeatedly informed the family that she was merely a streetwalker and therefore not a priority. This prejudiced attitude was evident at various points. April, later in life, had the opportunity to view the autopsy photos of her mother and was appalled by the numerous injuries, abrasions, and bruises that covered her body. In 2010, Christopher Goodall passed away, leaving the two girls orphaned. However, even before this tragedy, their family had already been fractured by Christina's untimely death. For 5 years, Ashley and April had been fending for themselves, with Ashley, at just 14 years old, scouring Quindaro in search of the person responsible for her mother's murder. Quindaro, once a thriving settlement, had become an abandoned ghost town and was considered unsafe during the 90s. Ashley found herself in perilous situations, desperately seeking closure. Eventually, she got into a truck with someone she believed had a connection to her mother's killer. This individual was supposedly a suspect because Christina King's cousin and 2 other women had stolen a significant quantity of his illicit substances. However, this was merely a rumor circulating on the streets. Fortunately, he turned out not to be the person Ashley was seeking, and he did not cause her any harm. 2 decades passed without any further progress in the case. Then in December 2021, the family gathered at the intersection of North 27th Street and Sewell Avenue for a prayer vigil and balloon release. The vigil had been organized by Justice for Wyandotte, an advocacy group committed to promoting transparency in law enforcement. The group extended their support to Christina King's investigation, as they aimed to assist the loved ones of those who had been mistreated by the legal system. Khadija Hardway, a member of Justice for Wyandotte, took charge of coordinating the entire event. During her address to the attendees, she emphasized the significance of cases like Christina's, highlighting the urgent need for the Kansas Police Department to establish a cold case unit. Hardway urged the new police chief to allocate existing funds towards the establishment of this unit, as she believed it will enhance transparency in addressing both cold cases and ongoing investigations. This plea sparked a transformative response within the KCPD, ultimately leading to a breakthrough in Christina's case. The newly appointed police chief, Carl Oakman, took Hardway's request seriously and wasted no time in fulfilling it. Immediately after being sworn in on January 1, 2021, he made a solemn commitment to establish a cold case unit within the force. True to his word, a year later, in January 2022, Kansas City's first cold case unit became operational, employing 3 dedicated full-time detectives. This unit would play a crucial role in solving long-standing cold cases. Understanding the origins of Justice for Wyandotte is essential. It all began with Pearl Davis, a 43-year-old mother. Born in 1953, Pearl Barnes was Khadija Hardaway's cousin and a devoted mother to her 2 young children. Pearl, also known as Semima Musawar, was an active member of the Kansas City Islamic community. She worked tirelessly to provide for her children, offering her services as a skilled seamstress and running a transportation business that catered to the Chillicothe Correctional Facility. Additionally, she worked as an SRS driver, operated a daycare, sold dinners and bean pies, and actively participated in her family's lives, juggling a diverse range of responsibilities. Given her extensive involvement in the community, her sudden disappearance did not go unnoticed by anyone. Regrettably, Pearl's lifeless body was discovered on November 22, 1996, in an unoccupied residence on Lafayette Avenue in Kansas City. The property had previously belonged to her deceased mother. The autopsy conducted on Pearl revealed a horrifying truth. She had been brutally stabbed more than 40 times, her clothing forcibly removed and scattered nearby. The responsibility of investigating this case fell upon Detective Roger Golubsky of the Kansas Police Department. However, Detective Golubsky faced allegations of misconduct as he had abused his position of authority on multiple occasions. From 1983 to 2008, the Kansas Police Department failed to properly investigate a series of similar cases involving women, most of whom were working women of similar ages. These women often found themselves grappling with homelessness, substance addiction, or engaged in escort services. Their tragic fates were marked by brutal methods such as strangulation, asphyxiation, blunt force trauma, or stabbing. Their lifeless bodies were heartlessly abandoned in remote locations or isolated structures. Disturbing me, All of these women were discovered either partially or completely unclothed, with their pants pulled down or shirts pulled off. The victim's clothing was typically found in close proximity. Christina King, too, endured these terrifying circumstances. As time passed and the cases grew cold, it became increasingly evident that something was amiss with Golubski. Despite his familiarity with most, if not all, of the women who had been mercilessly slain, none of the case files indicated his knowledge of these individuals. Furthermore, despite the abundance of potential physical evidence that could have been analyzed, these particular cases received insufficient attention from forensic experts. As a result, evidence collection was often limited and efforts to identify potential perpetrators through DNA or other forensic means were inadequate. The level of incompetence displayed was truly astounding. In fact, in Christina King's case, the Kansas Police Department received a DNA match with a potential suspect but failed to conduct a follow-up investigation. Khadija Hardway, moved by the prolonged neglect of Golubski's victims, Peace for Justice found inspiration to collaborate with the community in organizing rallies and demonstrations. The objective was to ensure that the unsolved cases, the faces of the affected women, and their stories would not fade into oblivion. Motivated by Pearl's case, she joined forces with like-minded women to establish a nonprofit called Justice for Wyandotte in 2020. The organization worked diligently to combat the department's corrupt individuals. Officers were observed using excessive force, bullying, intimidating, fabricating evidence, wrongfully arresting individuals, and coercing false testimonies to avoid false accusations and imprisonment. Thanks to Justice for Wyandotte shedding light on the crimes, they exposed the systematic corruption. They brought attention to the case of Lamont McIntyre, who was falsely accused and imprisoned for 23 years for a crime he did not commit. Despite being exonerated in 2017, he never received justice. Golubski remained free. However, there were still many unresolved issues regarding Golubski, particularly in victimizing women. During her involvement with the organization, Hardway arranged a meeting with Carl Oatman, a former candidate for chief of police. In this meeting, she highlighted the evident and unacceptable apathy surrounding unsolved cold cases in the community, stressing the enduring impact on Kansas City families and loved ones. She strongly advocated for the establishment of a cold case unit within the Kansas City Police Department. Following the meeting with Oatman, Justice for Wyandotte initiated an awareness campaign and petitioned for the establishment of a dedicated cold case unit, aiming to address the numerous unsolved cases that had occurred in Kansas City since 1965. In 2003, police received a DNA match from the condom found near Christina's body, identifying Gary Davis as the suspect. Surprisingly, he was not immediately questioned, despite being closely monitored by Wyandotte County Community Corrections. Gary Davis, a 52-year-old Kansas City resident, was a truck driver in his early 20s at the time of the alleged incidents involving Christina and Pearl. Due to the nature of his job, it was understandable why he had managed to evade suspicion back then, as he often traveled far from the crime scenes. Although the police were aware of his whereabouts, it took 20 years to finally arrest Davis. The investigation was slow, with a 14-month delay in questioning the suspect, followed by years of silence. After a public appeal for Justice for Wyandotte in 2021, it took another 18 months to process the DNA, form a team, and apprehend the perpetrator. In 2022, Cold Case Unit connected the dots, confirming that the DNA from both crime scenes matched Gary Davis Sr., the initial suspect. Police also discovered a Facebook page that matched Davis's name and description, containing controversial posts about truck driving and societal double standards. When attempting to contact him, officers found only one operational phone number out of 3 listed, with a full voicemail inbox. Finally, in September 2023, Davis was arrested and charged with the murder of Christina King, with bail set $500,000. Importantly, there was no statute of limitations, ensuring that justice could be served regardless of the time that had passed. If convicted, Davis could face life imprisonment. In a surprising turn of events, Wyandotte County District Attorney Mark Dupree and Kansas City Police Chief Carl Oatman jointly conducted a press conference to commend their investigative efforts. Dupree highlighted the relentless work of the detectives, while Oakman underscored the importance of a thorough investigation over the significance of the DNA hit. They both emphasized the meticulous analysis required to ensure the correct suspect was apprehended. Meanwhile, in March 2022, attorney Cheryl Pellet, representing Kansas City, shed light on the corrupt environment within the Kansas Police Department. She issued a statement aiming to indict not only disgraced Detective Roger Golubsky, but the entire culture that enabled his misconduct. Golubsky, responsible for an unjust arrest, faced federal charges including kidnapping, sexual assault, and human trafficking. Presently, the Kansas Police Department is collaborating with other law enforcement agencies to determine if Davis could be linked to additional homicides in the region or potentially thousands of miles away due to his occupation as a long-haul driver. Davis is currently a suspect or person of interest in at least 8 other cases. The establishment of the Cold Case Unit through Justice for Wyandotte led to the resolution of 11 more cases. It is evident that the Kansas Police Department bears responsibility for the delayed arrest, which could have been made years earlier. The department owes the families of the victims an apology and a thorough explanation. The distressed loved ones, particularly Christina's daughters, who sought closure for years, were all victims of the department's incompetence. In the early days of April 2011, a peculiar sight greeted the neighbors of house number 55 on Boulevard Robert Schumann in Nantes, France. The shutters of the Dupont de Ligonnès family home remained tightly closed, a stark contrast to their usual vibrant atmosphere. The absence of the usual sounds of laughter and play from the children and their pets raised concerns among the neighbors. Accustomed to the family's habit of leaving their shutters open, the closed windows prompted the worried neighbors to contact the local authorities. After several fruitless inspections, it was during the 5th visit that the police made a chilling discovery. Versailles, in the western suburbs of Paris, is where Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès was born on March 9, 1961. He was the eldest son of French Count Bernard Hubert Dupont de Ligonnès and his wife Geneviève Therese. In 1966, a daughter named Christine joined the family. After Bernard left his wife for another woman, Xavier stepped up to take care of his mother and sister. Geneviève believed she received divine messages, which she wrote down during automatic writing sessions reminiscent of a surrealist poet. Her unusual beliefs eventually turned into sermons about an impending apocalypse, leading her to create a cult called the Church of Philadelphia. The group included aristocrats who Geneviève convinced were chosen to survive the apocalypse and help rebuild the world. Christine was chosen by her mother to give birth to the Savior. According to Geneviève, the child would be a combination of Jesus and Satan destined to bring salvation. Despite being the heir to his father's noble title, Xavier was more interested in luxury fancy cars and peculiarities than French traditions. He also had a great admiration for the United States. Geneviève supported Xavier's extravagant lifestyle with significant contributions from cult members who were sworn to secrecy. In 1974, on the idyllic island of Brea, Xavier met Emmanuel Tenier. The two boys formed a strong bond of understanding that lasted a lifetime. It is said that Emmanuel even confessed his love for Xavier at that time, but despite the rejection, their friendship remained strong. 2 years later, Xavier met Agnes Hodanger. Agnes, born on November 9, 1962 in Neuilly-sur-Seine near Paris, was known for her deep religious devotion and worked as an assistant at the Blanche de Castille Catholic School in Nantes, where she taught catechism. Although there is limited information available about her family background, it is well documented that Xavier and Agnes shared a close bond, resulting in a passionate yet short-lived romance before parting ways. In 1990, Agnes welcomed her first child, Arthur, from a casual relationship. Shortly after, she and Xavier rekindled their love, eventually tying the knot. Xavier embraced Arthur as his own child. 2 years later, they celebrated the arrival of their first biological son, Thomas, who would carry on the family name. To mark this special moment, Xavier selected Emmanuel as Thomas's godfather. Following Thomas, Agnes and Xavier expanded their family with 2 more children, Anne and Benoit. The family of 6 embodied the image of an ideal household, with Xavier portraying a caring father and the children excelling academically. hinting at a bright future ahead. Agnes was devoted to nurturing her children's faith, often taking them to church. She was perceived by other parents as gentle yet firm with her kids. Around 2000, Xavier relocated his family to the United States to align with their interests and preferences. Despite Xavier's discreet, charismatic, and multilingual nature, his attempt to seamlessly integrate in the U.S. proved unsuccessful, resulting in substantial financial setbacks. Upon their return to France, Xavier found himself burdened with mounting debts stemming from his somewhat ambiguous professional endeavors. Various inquiries have labeled him as a salesman. Reports from French media outlets indicate that financial issues had been a pressing concern for Xavier over the years. Among his unsuccessful ventures was a peculiar plan to import cars from the US to France. He also ventured into several small businesses, such as a guide for sales representatives in the hotel and restaurant industry, a customer loyalty program for restaurants, an organization named the French Federation of Commerce, and a discreet enterprise where he held the title of manager. The financial situation of the last business venture was quite limited, prompting the hiring of 6 salespeople in 2003. Xavier's work commitments often kept him away from home during the weekdays, resulting in a modest income of approximately $4,200 annually. Over time, financial challenges began to strain his marriage, possibly exacerbated by common marital disagreements. Agnes extensively shared their struggles on a French forum in 2004, mentioning an unsettling comment made by Xavier about a family group death not being catastrophic. By 2009, the mounting debt significantly affected their relationship, leading to a temporary separation. During this period, Xavier sent numerous letters blaming Agnes for their family's problems and holding her accountable for their financial downfall. This emotional turmoil had a profound impact on Agnes, causing loss of appetite and insomnia. Xavier sought help from his friend Emmanuel on multiple occasions. Emmanuel, coming from a wealthy background, generously supported Xavier financially, despite living modestly in a small apartment. An enigmatic and somewhat eccentric individual, Emmanuel never hesitated to lend Xavier substantial amounts of money. Apart from financial aid, Emmanuel also financed Xavier's travels and co-signed for the house where Xavier eventually settled with his family. Thanks to Emmanuel's generosity in the late 2000s, the family lived in a chalet on 55 Boulevard Robert Schumann in the suburbs west of Nantes. Upon settling in, neighbors quickly formed the impression that Agnes was domineering and less amiable compared to her husband. Behind closed doors, Agnes faced a personal struggle, perceiving Xavier as both fragile and paradoxically rigid, almost militaristic. As the traditional head of the household, Xavier was emotionally distant, lacking tenderness and affection, and at times even abusive. Agnes shared her concerns about Genevieve's influence over Xavier with her friends from the Thursday prayer group. She described her mother-in-law as a troubled mystic, causing her deep fear. When Bernard passed away on January 20, 2011, Xavier hoped for an inheritance due to his father's financial capacity. However, he was shocked to find almost nothing in his father's estate except for a few papers, a rifle, a card, a ring, and some cash, which Xavier took immediately. Shortly after Bernard's death, Xavier withdrew cash using his father's card and obtained a firearms license on February 2nd. By March 12th, he had purchased a silencer for the rifle and even bought quicklime. Xavier practiced shooting in his garden, explaining to his friend Emmanuel that the silencer was to avoid disturbing the neighbors. On April 1st, they went to a shooting range together, focusing on Bernard's inherited rifle. The next day, Emmanuel called Xavier multiple times and they had a long conversation. Investigations suggest that the tragic events began on Sunday, April 3rd. That night, Xavier, Agnes, and their children went to the movies and had a pleasant dinner at a restaurant. Everyone was there except for Thomas, who was studying nearby. After returning home, neighbors saw them, and family members exchanged messages with friends. Xavier messaged Christine about their dinner. The prevailing theory is that Xavier drugged his family, waited for them to sleep, then shot and buried them in the garden, including the 2 Labrador dogs. Xavier meticulously crafted his alibi, starting on Monday morning by reaching out to individuals within his family circle. He made calls as early as 6 a.m., informing Agnes's workplace of her illness, contacting the children's schools with fabricated stories about their well-being. By midday, he even went as far as sending a letter to Arthur's workplace, stating that his son was resigning due to Xavier's transfer to Australia. However, Xavier still had to handle Thomas. On the same Monday, April 4th, he met with Thomas for dinner at a restaurant near his university residence. After the meal, a tired Thomas returned to his room. The next day, Thomas received a distressing message from his father, claiming Agnes was in a coma after a bicycle accident, prompting Thomas to rush to Nantes. It is suspected that Xavier murdered Thomas in the same manner as his other family members. Later that evening, Xavier had a conversation with Emmanuel, lasting just under 19 minutes. At midnight, a friend of Thomas received a message from him, stating he was watching a movie with his father at home. However, Thomas was likely already deceased by then. Approximately an hour later, emailed Emmanuel to arrange a meeting, with Emmanuel reminding him of the power of attorney and the key on the sailboat. Surprisingly, Xavier did not act discreetly, moving in and out of his house, leaving a note on the door and making transactions with his credit cards under his real name. As Xavier's flawless escape plan unfolded, neighbors began to notice concerning signs. The chalet's once open windows had been shut for days. The local children no longer spotted the family's 4 kids. The dogs barking had stopped and Agnes was nowhere to be found at work. It was as if they had all vanished into thin air. Concerned neighbors pieced together the clues and contacted the authorities. Upon arrival, officers found a nearly empty refrigerator with just a few jars of preserves, a still damp mop in the kitchen, a chess set on the living room table, and guitars on a sofa were also discovered. The Dupont de Ligonnat family seemed to have disappeared without a trace. Beds were stripped of sheets, picture frames were empty, and closets were devoid of clothes. In the midst of the mystery, a letter surfaced on April 9th, sent to family and friends. It claimed that Xavier had been recruited by the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, that the family had to go into hiding as part of a witness protection program, explaining their sudden disappearance and lack of contact. Neighbors grew suspicious and worried, feeling that something was amiss about the story. Fearing for the family's safety, they urged authorities to dig deeper. Meanwhile, Xavier set off on a journey through southern France in his car. As the case gained media attention, more details from the past came to light. On April 15th, security cameras captured Xavier entering a small hotel near Cannes. He parked his car, grabbed a bag, and vanished into the nearby woods. This was the last confirmed sighting of him. Interestingly, on the same day, Emmanuel called his mother, confessing hidden truths. He was gay, struggling with alcoholism and battling depression. Responding to the neighbors' concerns and the lack of leads, authorities revisited the family home. On April 21, 2011, an officer noticed a freshly disturbed patch of earth under a terrace. They soon uncovered a concrete slab and moments later made a chilling discovery. The corpses of Agnes and her 4 offspring were discovered ensconced in sacks, each bearing 2 to 3 bullet wounds and adorned with religious symbols. They were meticulously interred in burlap sacks with quicklime. The family's 2 Labradors were also laid to rest. Despite an exhaustive investigation, no traces of blood, fingerprints, or DNA were unearthed. Xavier swiftly became the most sought-after individual in France, accused of the heinous crime. His visage dominated the headlines, earning him monikers such as the Most Wanted Man, the Nantes Slayer, and the Epitome of Terror. However, he seemed to have inexplicably vanished without a trace. The post-mortem results of the 5 victims indicated to authorities that they were victims of a carefully orchestrated massacre. The majority of the bullets were aimed at their heads. Furthermore, traces of a sedative were detected in the children, supporting the theory that they were attacked while asleep. A shocking revelation emerged concerning Agnes. In the main bedroom, investigators discovered a device she used for her sleep apnea, which had ceased functioning precisely at 3:27 a.m. on April 4th. Investigators speculated that Xavier may have hesitated to harm Thomas as he was the family's heir. Due to the strong bond between Xavier and Emmanuel, the latter was summoned by the authorities. Emmanuel appeared cooperative during the initial questioning, suggesting that Xavier's disappearance was a form of spiritual journey before taking his own life. When asked about the rifle, Emmanuel initially feigned ignorance. However, further scrutiny into his background uncovered discrepancies, leading authorities to realize that he was not entirely truthful. A significant breakthrough occurred 24 hours later. Just before noon, Nantes police raided Emmanuel's residence. They seized his laptop, prompting Emmanuel to divulge his true knowledge about Xavier's firearm. A subsequent examination of the hard drive unveiled extensive correspondence between Emmanuel and Xavier. Correspondence between them varied from the ordinary to the profound, with certain emails injecting a peculiar twist into their connection. One particular email dispatched in the early hours of April 6th piqued the interest of law enforcement. The accumulation of these intricate details prompted investigators to suspect that Emmanuel may have played a role in Xavier's escape. However, Emmanuel was not the sole individual under suspicion. Christine also came under the investigators' scrutiny during their questioning. Christine and Genevieve were evasive, presenting a superficial image of Xavier and denying any association with the Church of Philadelphia. Genevieve touched upon Xavier's upbringing but steered clear of uncomfortable subjects like the origin of their wealth and adamantly refuted the existence of the sect. Nevertheless, the persistence of the investigative team paid off. They stumbled upon a copy of a complaint lodged years ago by former sect members who had fled in terror after Christine suggested engaging in relations with all the men to conceive the chosen one. This revelation about the sect, which boasted affluent members providing financial backing, proved to be pivotal. Investigators believed that this environment could have potentially offered Xavier logistical and material support. Consequently, all former members of the Church of Philadelphia were interrogated, and the sect's followers were closely monitored by the police in hopes of uncovering any slip-ups in their conversations or emails. Despite these extensive efforts, no concrete leads surfaced. Meanwhile, Xavier's cell phone records enabled authorities to track his movements within the country. The final tangible trace of Xavier was captured in a security footage from April 15th. Investigators speculated that he may have been carrying a weapon in his bag based on its shape. While all signs pointed towards the possibility of him having taken his own life in the woods, detectives were left perplexed as thorough searches in the dense forest failed to yield any trace of his body or remains. This led to the hypothesis that Xavier might have been picked up by a boat and transported to another country. Consequently, an international arrest warrant was issued on May 4th. The Nantes police reached out to the National Center for Fisheries Monitoring to investigate whether Emmanuel or Xavier possessed a motorboat or sailboat. Despite their efforts, no concrete evidence was found, acknowledging the possibility of outdated records. Emmanuel was called in for questioning on May 9th, which turned into an intense interrogation focused on locating a boat and identifying its owner. Unaware of the gravity of the situation, Emmanuel dismissed any suspicions when asked about a sailboat reference, attributing it to chance. He disclosed that Xavier had power of attorney to access his safe deposit box in case of an emergency, with the key hidden on a model sailboat in an apartment. Inside the safe was only his will. Disappointed and empty-handed, the police released Emmanuel, leaving the investigation in a state of uncertainty. Despite the peculiarities, he was considered a mere witness at that point. While deliberating on further interrogation, the police decided to exert some pressure on Emmanuel, deeming him the most reliable accomplice. A crucial development arose when investigators discovered a $4,200 check signed by Emmanuel for Xavier's company, leading to the revelation of an undisclosed account in Monaco. Efforts to obtain the account statements were hindered by Monaco's stringent banking privacy laws. On September 28th, officers revisited Emmanuel's home, where they found him disoriented and barely recognizable, surrounded by a desolate environment marked by empty alcohol bottles. The absence of communication from his friend weighed heavily on Emmanuel's mind, adding to his distress. The authorities no longer viewed him as a suspect, rather as a recluse, prompting them to question if they were on the wrong path. Xavier had transformed into one of France's most sought-after alleged criminals, possibly even on a global scale. In 2015, a journalist alleged to have received a letter from Xavier claiming he was still alive. Despite conducting handwriting, DNA, and fingerprint analyses, The note did not provide any new leads. On January 9, 2018, a monastery in Roquebrune-sur-Argent was raided by the police following a tip-off about a monk resembling Xavier. After an exhaustive 2-hour search, it was concluded that it was a case of mistaken identity. On January 18, 2019, Emmanuel passed away due to a heart attack. That same year, a man believed to be Xavier was apprehended at Glasgow Airport in Scotland. Once again, it was a case of mistaken identity. Another hypothesis proposed that Xavier could be in South America, particularly in Argentina, where his linguistic abilities and charm could aid him in blending in. Years have gone by, and the Church of Philadelphia not only endures, but has reportedly seen a resurgence. This secretive group, consisting of long-standing members who have secluded themselves from the world for nearly 4 decades, has been in the spotlight. In the summer of 2019, 2 siblings raised within the sect lodged fresh complaints against Christine and Genevieve. For 20 years, these women have staunchly asserted that Xavier is alive, innocent, and concealed in the United States under a witness protection program. They argue that everything mentioned in the letter dated April 9th is entirely fabricated. While this may appear to be denial, it could also be a tactic to mask certain realities. Since 2011, the case has been shrouded in conjecture and erroneous leads, leading authorities through endless mazes. The burning question remains, will justice ever be served for Agnes and her offspring? Despite the grim prospects, there are those who hold on to the belief that the truth will eventually be unveiled. This case started on a freezing Saturday night in December 1991 in Austin, Texas. 2 17-year-old girls named Eliza Thomas and Jennifer Hobison were co-workers at the I Can't Believe It's Yogurts tour at the North Cross Mall. It was almost 11 o'clock at night and their shift was about to end. A little bit after 10 o'clock, Jennifer's sister, 15-year-old Sarah Hobison, and her friend 13-year-old Amy Ayers were hanging around the mall. They were waiting for the girls' shift to end since the 4 of them were going to a slumber party together that night. To avoid being late to the party, Sarah and Amy entered the store to assist Eliza and Jennifer close up in time. It was already 12 o'clock and Officer Troy Gay of the Austin Police Department was on patrol that evening when he saw smoke coming from the strip mall. Firefighters quickly arrived on the scene after the officer called in. They soon discovered a horrifying scene while putting out the fire. In the store, the lifeless bodies of Jennifer, Sarah, Amy, and Eliza were strewn across the floor. It was obvious that they had been ruthlessly murdered. The teenagers were all bound and gagged in their own clothes while completely naked. Jennifer, Sarah, and Eliza were found in the rear of the back room, huddled into one corner, while Amy's body was recovered in the middle of the back room. Sarah and Eliza were piled on top of one another, and Jennifer was lying nearby. The girls' legs were wide open, and one of them had an ice cream scoop tucked in between it. The killer or killers had gathered napkins and other combustible materials from about the shop, doused the victims with lighter fluid, and then set the place on fire before escaping, leaving their bodies almost completely burned beyond recognition. Their autopsy results revealed that they had all been shot execution style in the back of the heads. Additionally, 2 or more of the girls had experienced sexual assault. Authorities also disclosed to the media that 2 firearms had been used in the killings, raising the possibility of at least 2 killers. Police investigators and the management of the yogurt shop determined that $540 also was taken from the shop. It was unclear if the girls had been targeted particularly because someone knew they would be alone inside the store that night, or if the intended purpose had been a robbery and the culprit had then recognized a chance to take advantage of them. Lead Detective John Jones and his partner Mike Huckabee launched an immediate investigation into the case. There were several problems with the investigation right away. First of all, the firefighters who responded to the crime scene did their jobs, but ultimately washed away important forensic evidence in the process. Furthermore, Austin had only one fingerprint unit at the beginning of the 1990s, which lacked forensic expertise. Additionally, there was only one homicide investigator working the shift the night of the murders due to the limited number of the city's homicide squad. Despite the police department's shortcomings, Detectives Jones and Huckabee had quite a large number of suspects. The police station's phones were ringing nonstop as tips poured in. When faced with 342 suspects and scores of fake confessions, the investigators became overwhelmed. The investigators started by looking into possible local serial killers due to the graphic nature of the crime and the staging of the teenagers' bodies. This led them to Kenneth Allen McDuff. Kenneth Allen McDuff was a Texas serial killer who is thought to have committed at least 14 murders. On August 6, 1966, he was found guilty of killing 3 teenagers named Robert Brand, Mark Dunman, and Edna Louise Sullivan. These killings were known as the broomstick murders because Edna's neck was broken like a broomstick after she had been sexually abused numerous times. For his crimes, Kenneth Allen McDuff was given a death sentence, but in 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court decided to end the death penalty in a 5-4 ruling, and his sentence was altered to life in prison with the chance of parole. He was granted parole in 1989 as a result of prison overpopulation. It is, however, believed that Kenneth Allen McDuff further committed numerous killings upon his parole, including the 1992 slaying of Melissa and Northrop, a 22-year-old Texan. After many years of eluding authorities, McDuff was ultimately apprehended and put on death row. On November 17, 1998, the day before he was put to death, he admitted to killing the 14 eggers at the yogurt store. He was foolish if he believed that making this last-minute confession would save his life. That day, as planned, he was put to death. Detectives looked into McDuff's confession but disregarded him when fingerprints and hair taken from the yogurt store could not be used to identify him as the killer. Days after the brutal killing of the girls, investigators received a tip to look into a teenager named Maris Pius. Maris Pius was a 16-year-old boy who was spotted with a gun that night at the North Cross Mall, where Sarah and Amy were hanging out before going to the yogurt store. The weapon was a handgun with a .22 caliber, the same caliber as one of the weapons used to kill the girls. However, nothing came out from the lead when Detectives Jones and Huckabee questioned Pierce along with his 3 friends who accompanied him to the mall. Ballistics analysis of Maurice Spears' gun revealed that it did not match the murder weapon. Additionally, just like with McDuff, none of the 4 suspects were identified by the fingerprints and hair samples taken from the crime site. The detectives eventually moved on from this. The case was given to new detectives after years went by without any arrests. Then, in 1999, Forrest Welburn, Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen, and Marie Spears, for earlier suspects now in their 20s, were apprehended for the killings at the yogurt store. These were the same suspects who had been questioned 8 days prior to the girls' deaths and had been let go due to a lack of evidence. Michael Scott, one of the suspects, admitted to the murders. He wasn't alone, though. Robert Springsteen also admitted to killing the girls and raping one of them. The police were sure they had their killers after these confessions. According to the theory, the 4 boys had intended to rob the yogurt shop. Forrest Welburn waited outside and kept watch as Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen, and Marie Spears entered the store. The theft went horribly wrong, though, and all of the females were killed. The allegations against Welburn were dropped after the authorities made 2 attempts to indict him for the killings, but were unable to do so due to a lack of evidence connecting him to the crime. Charges against Marie Spears were also dropped due to a lack of evidence, which was extremely difficult for the police and the families of the victims to accept, because he was thought to be the mastermind behind the crime and the subsequent killings. Both Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott were found guilty of capital murder after separate trials for the yogurt store killings. The state of Texas had approved a new death penalty statute, making it feasible for Robert Springsteen to receive the death penalty even after the Supreme Court decision in 1972. But Michael Scott received a 99-year jail sentence. However, shortly after their trials, grave questions were presented that showed Springsteen and Scott might not have been guilty. In the beginning, there was no tangible proof connecting any of them to the crime. Both men added that their confessions had been forced upon them, and there was some proof to support their assertions. One of the detectives working on the case was reassigned after it was claimed that he had forced confessions in an unrelated case. Additionally, a picture of another Austin police officer aiming a gun at Scott's head during questioning surfaced. Both convictions were overturned by the courts after they determined that they had violated Springsteen and Scott's amendment right to confront their accuser. This came 15 years after the yogurt shop killings were perpetrated. During the trial, Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen's confessions were used against each other, but their attorneys were never permitted to cross-examine the accuser. It was determined that their constitutional rights had been violated as a result. Later, in 2008, DNA testing on the evidence gathered from the crime scene revealed that neither Scott nor Springsteen's DNA, nor that of any other persons accused of the crime, matched the results. According to then Travis County District Attorney Rosemary Lemberg, the yogurt store murder was committed by Scott and Springsteen, but the men would not be charged again until the unknown man linked to the DNA evidence at the crime scene was located. The majority of law enforcement officials continue to believe that the original 4 suspects were the culprits, and that the DNA evidence implicating a 5th suspect was a fabrication. The 5th suspect argument, according to Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen's defense attorneys, is absurd, and they emphasize that no one ever brought up a 5th suspect before the inconvenient DNA results came in. According to some attorneys, investigators, family members, and armchair detectives who have studied this case, the killers of the teenagers may have been 2 unnamed customers who were at the yogurt store right before it closed. Although 52 customers who had come into the store on the day of the murders were reportedly questioned by the police. 2 individuals who witnesses said were present at closing time have never been located. 3 customers left the store shortly before it closed and on their way out. They reportedly saw 2 males seated in a booth, and they didn't appear to be planning to leave anytime soon. Perhaps the men ordered a soft drink. When Jennifer and her coworker decided to close the store, at least one of the customers witnessed her lock the front door and post a closed sign to prevent any additional customers from coming in. After all the other customers had left, only the 2 men in the booth remained. Witnesses gave the following descriptions of the persons of interest. One is around 5 foot 6 inches tall and has lighter hair, maybe like a dirty blonde. He seemed in his late 20s through early 30s. The second man is noted as being larger. Both were dressed in larger jackets, one of which was green. An army-fatigued kind of looking jacket, the other had a black jacket. Neither of these males has been named as of yet. In the end, it is debatable if robbery was really the true motivation in this instance. It is difficult to believe that these killings were just the outcome of a robbery gone wrong given the meager sum of money seized and the high level of violence. The likelihood that the murder was committed with sexual motivation and that the murderers only grabbed the money as an afterthought is substantially higher. It's possible that one of the girls knew the murderers. Or it's possible that Sarah and Amy were followed from the mall to the yogurt store. Linking the DNA evidence discovered at the scene to the 2 male customers who were observed by witnesses lingering in the yogurt shop after closure could hold the key to solving this case. The 1991 murders at the yogurt business altered the city of Austin irrevocably. The murders were referred to by the then mayor as the crime where Austin lost its innocence. Residents of Austin began to doubt the safety of their community after the brutal and untimely deaths of 4 young girls who still had their entire lives ahead of them. The I Can't Believe It's Yogurts tour was converted into a nail salon, but a plaque honoring Jennifer Hobson, Sarah Hobson, Amy Ayers, and Eliza Thomas still stands in the parking lot beneath a large oak tree, serving as a reminder to anybody passing by that the murder case is yet to be solved and that justice is yet to be served. 29-year-old Kelsey Barrett lived in Woodland Park, Colorado. Her friends described her as a country girl at heart, and from a young age she had loved driving tractors and booking bales. She enjoyed traveling, the outdoors, and adventure, and her job as a pilot and flight instructor helped scratch this itch for seeing the world even more. It was on a dating website in 2016 that she met a Colorado cowboy, 32-year-old Patrick Frazee. Patrick lived on his mother Sheila's 35-acre ranch, where he trained cattle dogs and had horses and donkeys. Naturally, Kelsey was drawn to him right away and the pair immediately hit it off. They soon got engaged, and in October 2017, Kelsey gave birth to the couple's daughter, Kaylee. Kelsey's mom Cheryl said her daughter, ever the low-key person, didn't want a big wedding at all. She wanted something nice and small between them and God. As the months passed, sadly for Kelsey, nothing seemed to change or move forward, and they were still in a long-distance relationship. Kaylee would live with Kelsey, and Kelsey would drive to Patrick's ranch on her days off. He wanted her to move in with him, but he lived with Sheila, and Kelsey said she just wanted to live with him and Kaylee, not his mother as well, so moving plans were at a standstill. Friends said over the following months things were getting tougher, and Kelsey's dreams of what she wanted for her family were quickly dissipating. She mentioned to friends that she was worried about Patrick talking to her next girlfriend as well, but she didn't know for sure. It was just another thing she was feeling low about. Having a baby is a hard enough challenge as it is, but with Patrick refusing to come and see her and his life not changing a single bit, she told friends she was struggling to juggle everything. He seemed to have just checked out, but she wasn't going to give up on what they had. It was now coming to the end of 2018, and the holiday season was in full swing. Kelsey was putting things to the back of her mind to enjoy spending time with Kaylee, who is now just over a year old, and her mom Cheryl. As everyone was starting to settle down for their Christmas plans, Kelsey's mom Cheryl had other things on her mind. She was getting increasingly worried as she hadn't heard from her daughter since Thanksgiving. Yes, she was busy with her job and a baby, but something felt off. She decided to voice her feelings to the local police department and requested a welfare check. When police arrived at Kelsey's house, they spotted her car parked outside. There were some unwashed dishes and uneaten food on the kitchen counter, along with what looked like most of her belongings. All her clothes and bags seemed to be untouched, but they couldn't find her phone or purse. They said there were no signs of foul play, but a missing persons report was filed and Kelsey's information started circulating. Cheryl said the last time she spoke to her daughter was Thanksgiving morning, November 22nd. She had been baking some cinnamon buns and was going to head for some more food to make dinner. She was chatty and what sounded like in good spirits. For Cheryl, who spoke to her every day, she said nothing stood out to her about the call. Just afternoon, Kelsey went to the local Safeway store with Kaylee for some more food. It appeared that Patrick was joining them for dinner, as she had sent him a text message and said, "Bought some sweet potatoes in case you wanted some sweet potato casserole." Naturally, the police wanted to talk to her fiancé as well. To their surprise, he told them that Kelsey had actually ended things with him just a day before Thanksgiving. He said they weren't meshing anymore, but they were going to work on things being 50-50 for Kaylee. So where was Kaylee now, they asked. Well, Kaylee was with him. A day after Kelsey called things off, Thanksgiving, they met briefly in an alley so she could hand over their daughter. Patrick told police he returned some of Kaylee's belongings to her at the same time. He then took Kaylee to his ranch for Thanksgiving dinner where she stayed, but Kelsey didn't come. He said he had heard from her a little bit over the coming days, and in one conversation he asked, "Are you awake?" She replied, "Sorry, I didn't hear my phone. Going to jump in the shower. I'll call you guys when I'm out." Later on, after a phone call, Patrick messaged her saying, "This is truly what you want. I'll respect your wishes and give you space." But why the sudden end to things, they wondered. She had just been buying ingredients for dinner, baking, and talking about wedding dresses with her mother. He said that Kelsey struggled with depression and he called her unstable, hinting that she may be feeling suicidal. He told them she might even be in rehab, implying some sort of drug abuse. Her friends and family were shocked. There was no way this was true. She would never have left her daughter for this long, and they had never heard anything about depression or drugs. Cheryl said that Kelsey was trying to make things work, and it was in fact Patrick that had told her he didn't want to deal with things anymore. In fact, the more the police dug, the more they realized there was no evidence to suggest that they had broken up or even taken a break. Things got stranger when her boss said she had texted him saying that Patrick would be coming to their company holiday party. He described her excitement with a lot of exclamation marks and emojis. It clearly meant so much to her that he was going to attend. But not long after, he got an unexpected message from her saying she would be taking a week off from work with no reason for it. More alarmingly still, her phone had shown pings in Idaho, 800 miles away from her house. Cheryl and Kelsey's brother Clint knew there was more to this, and they decided to start their own investigation, beginning at her house. They knew her place really well and could easily spot things out of place that perhaps the police wouldn't have known to look for. As soon as they walked in, they were hit by the heat. It was sweltering hot inside and everything had been cranked up to full. The cinnamon buns she had made Thanksgiving morning were sat on the side, and her dishes had all been left out. Oddly though, her refrigerator looked like it had been wiped down recently. You could still see the streaks on it. They saw the mat in the bathroom was gone, and her brother noticed what looked like blood on the toilet. Cheryl called the investigators back, and this time they brought luminol and the cadaver dog. They found blood everywhere, and DNA results confirmed it was Kelsey's. The lead investigator said, "It was until after I got done interviewing Cheryl Barrett and Clint Barrett that it began to cause me to think this is just not characteristic of Kelsey. This is not something she would just up and leave." Kelsey was a very proud mom, a hardworking woman, determined, a great mom. She'd never gone off before. She was always in communication with her mom. There were no signs of a forced entry into the home. There were no signs of a struggle. At that point, I started thinking, this isn't a woman who would have left on her own. They got the FBI involved right away, and over the coming days more press conferences were held along with vigils, and a $25,000 reward was on offer for any information. There was now no other conclusion they could really draw from the blood, her total lack of contact with anyone, and the fact she had left her daughter. They believed Kelsey had been murdered. On day 4 of the search, the police said they were close to breakthroughs in the case, and there was one person they were looking closely at, Patrick. He hadn't attended any of the press conferences or vigils, and hadn't called to check in on the progress once, and CCTV from Kelsey's neighbor's house told a very different story to what Patrick had told them. Footage showed Patrick entering Kelsey's house with both her and Kaylee on the day she disappeared. He had told them he had met her in an alley where she had handed over Kaylee. A few hours later, he was at her house again, but this time he was alone. But given how the recordings had picked things up, it was unclear as to whether or not he was coming or going. Kelsey's phone data also showed something else. They could now confirm that both hers and Patrick's phones had been together for several days after she was last seen, and her phone was last pinging all the way over in Idaho, and from there several messages had been sent from her phone to Patrick, Kelsey's boss, and even Cheryl. On December 14th, the FBI executed a search warrant at his property, and huge amounts of land started to get dug up. More cell phone warrants were written for Patrick's phone as they tried to work out what the Idaho connection could possibly be. There was one number standing out to them that connected everything. It was linked to a nurse living in Idaho called Crystal Lee Kenny. They called her, but she denied knowing Patrick. Then told a vague story about going to see him to maybe buy some horses. But the more they looked at things, the more obvious it was that Crystal and Patrick had actually been having an on-off relationship for over a decade. She was recently divorced, and this was when their relationship had really taken off. Her ex-husband was happy to share this information with them. The messages sent from Kelsey's phone in Idaho had clearly been sent by Crystal. They were pinging off of the same towers near to where she lived, and now it appeared Kelsey's phone had been destroyed, but was having an affair enough to establish a motive for wanting Kelsey dead. Police weren't sure, and they still didn't have a body. A friend of Crystal's then came forward. She knew that they were looking at the pair in connection with Kelsey's case, and Crystal had shared something disturbing with her that she felt she now had to share. Patrick had said to Crystal, "I need you to take care of my baby mama." Something Crystal and her friend both interpreted to mean, "I want Kelsey dead." Patrick had told Crystal that Kelsey was an abusive mom and drug addict, and he wanted to save his daughter and have full custody, but he needed Crystal to do it for him. He was also financially in a lot of trouble. He had just defaulted on a $72,000 loan and had not paid Kelsey the agreed $700 a month in child support since July. He was listed as the beneficiary to a large life insurance policy that had recently been taken out by Kelsey, which, as well as wanting full custody and the ongoing affair, provided another motive for wanting Kelsey out of his picture. The police went back to Crystal and put all of this information to her, and the truth finally started to come out. She admitted that yes, she and Patrick had been having an on-off affair for years, and Patrick had asked her to kill Kelsey for him, firstly by poisoning coffee and dropping it off at her house pretending to be a stranger, and then beating her to death. But when these plans didn't come to anything, frustrated, he decided to carry out the awful plot himself. Crystal, now knowing how serious this all was, agreed to show the investigators around Kelsey's home, tell them everything start to finish, and testify against Patrick. But on one condition, she would plead guilty to the far lesser charge of tampering with evidence, a charge which, if convicted, she would only get a maximum of 3 years for. The prosecution were torn, but ultimately agreed, describing it as a deal with the devil, but they needed the truth. Crystal walked them around Kelsey's house. Using her admissions plus cell phone records, the police now had some sort of timeline and their case against Patrick was strong. On November 22, 2018, the same day Kelsey was last seen, there was a lot of contacts between Patrick and Kelsey's phones, which started at around 1 a.m. Kelsey sent a text to Patrick at 9:37 a.m. and then they spoke on the phone for a few minutes too. She told him about the Thanksgiving dinner she was making before going to Safeway at 12:20. At 12:31 p.m. Patrick called Kelsey and they spoke on the phone for just 30 seconds. Patrick said that as they were now over they then met in an alley to swap Kaylee over and that was the last time he saw her. But as they now knew, this was not the last time he saw her. Both of their cell phones were connected to the same tower between 1 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. that afternoon. At 1:24 p.m. Patrick could be seen entering the front door of Kelsey's house with her. Once inside, according to Crystal, he blindfolded Kelsey and asked her to smell some scented candles, telling her to guess the scent. He then grabbed a baseball bat and, in his words, started swinging. He beat her to death, knocking out some of her teeth in the process. While this was happening, her daughter was playing in the other room. Her last words, according to Patrick, were, "Please stop." After this, he went to a Walmart with Kaylee and topped up his gas. Later, he was seen going back to her home at around 3:30 p.m. Once inside, Patrick called his mother Sheila and Crystal. Crystal told investigators that he called her to come to Colorado because she had a mess to clean up. She understood that this was code for Kelsey of being killed and she needed to clean the house. He also told her to try and find Kelsey's missing teeth while she was there. She packed some bleach, gloves and the likes and set off on the 13-hour overnight drive from Idaho to Colorado. After he hung up, he forced Kelsey's body into a tote that was picked up on camera in the back of his truck. In total, he had been picked up entering and exiting her house 11 times that day. Both his and Kelsey's cell phones were connected to the same towers as he drove to a place called Nash Ranch to temporarily hide her body. He then left to have Thanksgiving dinner with Kaylee and his family. When Crystal got to her house, she cleaned it for hours. She alleged that she purposely left several spots, claiming that she wanted him to get caught and the truth to come out at some point. On November 24th at about 5 p.m. and after cleaning up, and Patrick went to Nash Ranch to retrieve Kelsey's body. They drove the tote from Nash Ranch back to Patrick's home. Patrick had made 19 phone calls and sent numerous text messages to and from both phones, pretending to be Kelsey during this time. They put the tote and the bat used to kill her into a huge trough. They poured 5 gallons of gasoline over the top and watched everything burn. Crystal tossed in Kelsey's Bible, some of Kaylee's toys too. She said that when they were burning the tote, Patrick's mother Sheila stood on the porch and watched too. Sheila, however, would later plead the fifth on this one. Crystal then took Kelsey's gun and phoned to Idaho to continue creating a fake narrative with texts. Patrick told her to take Kelsey's gun because he wanted to create the illusion that Kelsey might want to take her own life. At some point, Crystal destroyed Kelsey's phone and Patrick went into a Verizon store to ask if they could recover information if the phone was no longer working. She then showed them around his ranch too. Crystal's best friend that she had confided in told her she regretted not passing on the information before anything happened to Kelsey. She believed Crystal was scared and said she had very, very good reasoning for whatever it is she may or may not have done. On December 21st, less than a month after she had been reported missing, Patrick Frazee was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, solicitation to commit murder, along with 6 other charges. He pleaded not guilty to everything. Crystal Lee Kenny pleaded guilty to tampering with evidence and became a star witness for the prosecution. The lead investigator said in his 37 years on the force, he had never had a nobody case before. And although he was glad that he could get some answers from Crystal, he now knew there were no remains for Kelsey's family to later arrest. He had to really gear himself up for the conversation and said, "In my mind, I'm hoping we're going to find the body. And when she tells us she's burned it, I thought, how do I tell Cheryl? How do you tell a mother and father that your daughter's been burned? It's hard to tell a parent, but to tell them this happened, I couldn't do it." Sheila, his mother, was also briefly detained but not placed under arrest. The courts held an emergency custody hearing to determine what would happen to Kaylee. Patrick's parents were fighting for custody, but the judge determined Kaylee should stay with Cheryl. If what Crystal said was true, then given the fact Patrick's mother watched him burn Kelsey's body, it's good to know that custody did not go to her. To some of Kelsey's friends, it came as no shock that Patrick was behind what had happened. Patrick's ex-girlfriend Vanessa said she saw this side of his character during their relationship. She said was attracted to his sharp wit and he was excellent at reading people, but his behavior quickly became emotionally abusive and controlling. Their on-again, off-again relationship ended in 2014, when Vanessa said she came across the definition of a psychopath online. It fit him to a T and matched all of his behaviors, and she decided she had to call time on things once and for all. Vanessa believed Crystal was under his spell just as the way she used to be. He's a very, very complicated individual and he's very, very smart. And like I said, he can read people really well and he knew how to press people's buttons, she said. In October 2019, almost a year after Kelsey was last seen, Patrick's trial started. During the trial, cameras and live reporting were banned and security was tight. The jury would hear from some key witnesses including Crystal and an inmate that had shared a cell with Patrick. Patrick had passed the inmate notes on toilet paper asking him to help kill people on the outside that knew what was going on. Crystal was one and her best friend and Cheryl were two others. One note read, "They all need to disappear unseen until 11:22 after the trial. I'd really like to see Crystal with a bullet in her head. No video, no weapon, no body, no forensics." After just a few hours, the jury unsurprisingly returned a unanimous guilty verdict. Patrick Frazee was sentenced to life without parole for first-degree murder to be followed by 3 consecutive sentences of the maximum 48 years each for the 3 counts of solicitation to murder and the maximum of 12 years for tampering with a body and be followed by 5 years of parole. In total, he was sentenced to life without parole plus an additional 156 years. Patrick Frazee will die in prison. The judge said your actions were vicious, senseless, without reason nor explanation. After you beat her, you burned her body like a piece of trash. Your crimes deserve the absolute punishment available. Kelsey's family had agreed not to seek the death penalty against him, with Cheryl saying, "We believe in a forgiving Savior and hope that Patrick will take this opportunity to repent and seek his forgiveness. We respect life and leave Patrick's in God's hands. It's not ours to take." The district attorney praised Kelsey's family, having grown close to them over the trial. He described them as salt of the earth, wonderful people. Crystal Lee Kenny was also sentenced to just 3 years in prison. Kelsey's family acknowledged that without Crystal's cooperation, a conviction would have been difficult, if not impossible. But they believed, along with many people, that she should have received a much heavier sentence. The only thing she didn't do was swing the bat, they said. The lead investigator added, "Crystal did some horrific things, and as horrific as what Patrick did, Crystal did some hardcore things too. It was hard, and it's still hard for me to understand why she made the decision she made, partially because I'm not in a domestic violence situation. I have an appreciation and respect for the dynamics of it all. She's an intelligent woman. She's a good mom. The decision she made and why, quite frankly, I'm not sure any of us would ever understand. But without Crystal, we wouldn't be where we are today." But another detective wasn't so sure and said, "I'm still torn. I think between empathy and just being appalled by what she did. Like he said, I'm not part of a domestic situation. I have never been. I can't speak to what's going through someone's mind. It's just hard to understand. 11 hours, come down and do that. And you don't call the cops? Don't understand it." Crystal was then resentenced to 18 months and released early in 2021. Patrick Frazee appealed his sentence, but in 2023 this was denied. None of Kelsey's remains have ever been found. What happened in the small community that Thanksgiving Day definitely left a dark cloud over the town, one that everyone was keen to try and remove as best they could. Volunteers, construction workers, and other local businesses came together to donate their skills and materials to rehabilitate Kelsey's now damaged house so that it could be resold. It was our way of showing that Woodland Park isn't about Patrick Frazee. It's about good people, one neighbor said. To think that Kelsey's daughter will grow up without knowing her is heartbreaking. And for what on earth possessed Patrick to do this is still not known. It was a senseless murder for simply nothing more than murder's sake. Kelsey's uncle said his whole family are big huggers, but Kelsey definitely gave the best ones, and that is something everyone will always miss. A detective said there's questions we have never answered. I don't put pictures of victims in my cubicles or anything like that. I think we all remember our victims, all of them in cases like this. Kelsey's just going to be one that sticks with me for a long time. I can't fathom why Patrick did it. I don't know what possesses an individual, be it Patrick or anyone else, be so angry and violent to the mother of their child. I just don't know. Another officer and the district attorney added, unfortunately, we never got to meet Kelsey in real life. We would have loved to have met her under a different circumstance. For a woman to be involved in the aviation industry or the military, it's not an easy task. It's a difficult world to get in, but she had no difficulties at all. She was so well respected. She was revered. She was appreciated. The comments that her coworkers made about her, even how the students talked about her, really showed what a wonderful person she was and just how dedicated she was to not only her daughter, but to her country. How we feel means nothing. I hope if Kelsey's soul has the ability, she knows that people did care. That we, all of us involved, all the people from the FBI, CBI, the DA's office, everybody, people did care. She was and still is important. She always will be. May 20th, 2020. We start today's episode in the middle of the UK's lockdown. The port town of Barrow and Furness in Cumbria was described as almost like a ghost town. The streets were empty and most people were inside and online. One of those people was 20-year-old Eleanor Williams, and she was on Facebook. After typing out a lengthy paragraph, she hit share on a post that would go viral almost as soon as it went live. I think this is the hardest post I'm ever going to write. It began. Yesterday, I was put into the back of a car and taken to an address to have sex with 3 Asian men. Afterwards, I was beaten to teach me a lesson. She continued. She went on to speak about years of abuse, rape, grooming, and torture, as well as being trafficked to different countries. She shared pictures of her injuries. Injuries that looked so painful, they made you wince when you saw them. She was covered in bruises, her eyes were swollen shut, and she had rats carved into her stomach. She listed how over the years her many abusers had broken her ribs and the bones in her face, tried to cut off her breasts, put cigarettes out on her, and dislocated her arm. She said they had given her drugs to the point that she was nearly addicted to heroin and many times just dumped her naked and left her to die. People's mouths fell open as soon as they read it and pored over all the awful pictures. One of her friends said it was something that would have been the plot to a film. Within an hour of the post going live, the police had someone in custody. But it was not one of Eleanor's abusers. It was Eleanor Williams herself. The outrage spread further afield than the small community in which she lived. No one could believe that someone could come forward so bravely to share their story and be met with an arrest. It was unfathomable. Outrage at the police soon followed, as well as the men that Eleanor had accused. Hashtags trended for her, videos in support of her went equally viral, and posters went up across Barrow. Huge protests were taking place. More than 100,000 people joined the Justice for Early Facebook page, and one online fundraising campaign raised more than £20,000. But as people marched through the streets, smashed windows, donated money, and shared everything and anything they could on social media, no one could ever have predicted what would happen next as the full and deeply unsettling truth was about to come out. Eleanor Williams first came onto the police's radar in November 2017. 16 years old at the time, she lived a quiet life by all accounts, living with her mom, stepdad, and siblings. Her parents had split when she was younger and she didn't see too much of her dad. Her family were quite well known around town as her mom Allison was a labor counselor and described as a pillar of the community. People said Eleanor could go through periods of being quite quiet, maybe even a little subdued. Friends said she would occasionally skip school, much preferring to be out socializing and at house parties, but they said it was nothing out of the ordinary for a lot of teenagers. Just after 1 p.m. on November 22, 2017, Eleanor sat down for a taped interview in the police office. "Can you tell me your full name?" "My name's Eleanor Williams." She had already gone to the hospital with her mother after concerns that she had been sexually assaulted at a party, but was struggling to piece everything together. Eleanor told them that after finishing a shift early, she uploaded a picture to Snapchat after her friends saw they encouraged her to come to a local house party, but she said no. She wasn't feeling it. They said it would just be a small group, some drinks and a good laugh. So she finally gave in and turned up. It was at her friend Cameron's house. She went on to say that she and Cameron took a shot of vodka in his bedroom and then he had tried to kiss her. She didn't want to engage and made an excuse to go to the toilet, but he got angry and dragged her back by her hair, throwing her onto the floor. She said she couldn't remember anything after that. She woke up in her own house and then started receiving messages on Snapchat from Cameron. One said, drugged you, ed you, mugged you, left you, laughed at you. I've got HIV. Terrified, she then went straight to hospital. 22-year-old Cameron was horrified and denied that anything had happened. He was so confused when he saw the Snapchat screenshots. He said it simply wasn't true. Couldn't be true. That was not him. He said yes, Eleanor was at his party, but she was so drunk at one point he contacted her sister to try and help and to make sure she got home okay. He was concerned about her. He was let go and Eleanor eventually said she was dropping everything against him. However, he remained on bail and the police's radar for a further 6 months after this. 2 years later, the now 19-year-old Eleanor was living in her own flat. After frequent fights with her mom and stepdad, she said she was sick of it and needed her own space. It was at this time that she would contact the police again. On May 9, 2019, with bruising across her face, Eleanor detailed how a man named Jordan Trengo attacked her with a knife, beat her and raped her 3 times. She showed messages from Jordan, some which read, "I'll rape you again and leave you for dead." Jordan was interviewed but denied it all. They had been on a night out together back in March, but he said Eleanor disappeared halfway through the night and he didn't even see her leave. He was far busier trying to talk to another girl. He said they knew of each other but not very well, and he emphatically stated that those messages had not been sent by him and he was beyond confused. On that particular night out, he and the girl he was talking to, Ebony, were actually dropped home by police officers after they spotted Jordan arguing at a taxi rank. He and Ebony stayed at his that night. It seemed a pretty solid alibi and he was let out on bail, but a few days later, Eleanor would call the police again. She said Jordan had forced his way into her flat and attacked her, beating her with a shower head. Police thought for someone still on bail and under investigation, this was brazen on another level. They couldn't take another chance on letting him go and Jordan Trengov was arrested and charged with 3 counts of rape. He pleaded not guilty to everything and was placed in Preston Prison's sex offender wing while awaiting trial. Word was starting to spread and everyone was staggered to hear Jordan's name tied up in something so bad. It just didn't make sense. A month later, Eleanor was reported missing. This was not the first time, far from it. Her family and friends had made calls about her well-being many times and each time she was found by the police. It was possible, they thought, that because of everything with Jordan, she had run away and there was a concern that she might attempt to hurt herself. She had more cuts and bruising to her body and police suspected she was using alcohol or drugs or both. A month later, Eleanor was back at the station to make another report. She told them she had met an older man she called Rami at a house party years ago. A house party she admitted she should never have been at. Rami was Mohammed Ramzan, a married father of 4 and a local well-known and well-respected businessman, and Eleanor said she had known him since she was 12 and he had started grooming her almost immediately. She said at one particular party he had asked her to go and have sex with one of his friends, calling it a massive favor. Eleanor said she did. Detectives listened in horror, wondering what on earth was going on in their quiet seaside town. What were they scratching the surface of? Eleanor told them things had escalated and she was now being taken to various homes to meet multiple men at the same time. Some houses were even in Rochdale and Oldham, hours away from Barrow. She claimed Mohammed was the organizer of what was seeming to be a huge group of men and organized crime. She said Mohammed had tried to sell her for 25,000 euros in Amsterdam. And she also wrote down a list of names or descriptions of more than 50 girls that she said were victims as well. Investigators said they couldn't help but think of past things like the Rochdale grooming gang, which came to a head in 2012. This saw 9 men convicted of sex trafficking and rape amongst other charges. And as of January 2024, a total of 42 men have been convicted, resulting in jail sentences, totaling 432 years, and 47 girls have so far been identified as victims. They also thought of what is known as the Rotherham child exploitation scandal, which saw organized child sexual abuse happening in Rotherham in northern England between the 1980s right through until 2013, with over 1,400 victims. Both of these appalling instances highlighted years of failures of the authorities to act on reports that had been made to them. As the police listened, the parallels seemed uncanny, and it was hard to not let their mind go to the past. They wondered if they were uncovering something similar here. They arranged for new accommodation for Eleanor outside of Barrow, worried that if these men found out what she had told them, it could be life-threatening for her. Mohammed Ramzan was quickly arrested and interviewed. It took him a minute to even realize who Eleanor was. He said he barely knew her, let alone had spent any time with her. As detectives reeled off the list of crimes, places, and times, he sat aghast. He couldn't believe what he was hearing and denied everything. After almost 48 hours in custody and hours of interviews, the police concluded they did not have enough to hold him, and Mohammed was released on bail. But her allegations were so serious that the local station wanted outside resources to help and set up a major investigations team. The senior investigator said if history was anything to go off, they could not under any circumstances take a chance. Over the following months would become a regular face at the station. She was working closely with the team and would share everything with them. She revealed to the team that she had been forced to go to Blackpool on June 30th after being told she was very valuable, and this was a place they could make more money from her. Police said she gave a huge amount of detail and specifics about everything. Descriptions of the shops, the sounds she heard, the streetlights, what calendars people had on their walls, what color their hallway wallpaper was. They were elated she could remember so much, knowing this was building a really strong case for them. They asked if they could drive to Blackpool themselves and go around in an unmarked car, whilst she pointed out the locations to them. She said that she would. But as soon as they reached Blackpool, this was where all her details stopped. It was now just a long list of "don't know" and "I'm not sure." They spent 2 days driving around, but Eleanor couldn't give them anything. Other officers were going to various hotels and B&Bs in the area, sharing Eleanor's details and asking if anyone under her name had been booked in on June 30th. Finally, at the Savoy Hotel, a staff member at reception confirmed that yes, and Ellie Williams had indeed booked a room with them. She had reserved it 2 days beforehand via booking.com, and CCTV showed her checking in alone at about 8:30 p.m. An hour later, she left the hotel and more cameras picked her up in a couple of local shops. She paid for a pot noodle and some milk before heading straight back to her room. During this time frame, she had already told the police that she was being driven around and assaulted in various locations by various men. Reception could show them her keycard information, and after she got back to her room that night, her door had not been opened for almost 24 hours. She didn't leave once and no one entered her room. She was actually logged into BBC iPlayer and watching videos on her phone. She then returned home by bus. Back in small community of Barrow, with Jordan now in jail and Mohammed under investigation for the most serious of offenses, this was really all people could talk about. Police had been going door to door talking to the girls Eleanor had named as also being victims of this alleged grooming gang. But none of them had a clue what was going on or what she was talking about. One girl said she was baffled when the police knocked on her door. She had only been on one night out with Eleanor, and it certainly had not ended with anything like that. Had gone to the same school together but were in different years, and she said she always remembered thinking there was something very strange about her behavior, but this was just bizarre. It was this, combined with the CCTV from the hotel, that gave police an awful realization. Eleanor Williams was lying. In July 2019, police had enough to place Eleanor under arrest for perverting the course of justice, but as they went to present her with what they had found, she went missing again. Her brother's girlfriend finally made a call to 999 saying she'd been driving around searching late one night when she found her stumbling alone on a bridge. Eleanor got into her car and she dropped her home, making sure she got in safely. 20 minutes later, the police turned up still ready to arrest her. It was now 10 to 1 in the morning. When Eleanor opened the door, she was bleeding from her mouth. Her eyes were swollen and her shoulders were covered in red marks. This was not at all what they were expecting given what her brother's girlfriend had just said. But they took her straight to hospital. In a word, she named another person, someone called Oliver. She told a story of being forced to go and meet him in Preston, where he had made her take drugs and raped her. She said he was part of a sex trafficking ring in Ibiza and said she had his number for them to track him down. She was clearly intoxicated and admitted to drinking alcohol and smoking spice. Spice is a synthetic drug which originally came onto the recreational drugs market to mimic the effects of cannabis. But spice is dangerous due to its potency and the way it exerts effects on the brain and body. It is often referred to as the zombie drug and can cause seizures, extreme anxiety, and even psychosis. They found her on CCTV getting off the train at Preston just as she had said. When they found the man she had accused, they were also able to locate him on the cameras. Ali was a trainee electrician and had been celebrating a birthday in town when he bumped into Eleanor randomly. He had in fact stopped her to get a lighter from her. They chatted for about 20 minutes and walked into an alleyway, where he admitted to kissing her and embarrassingly recalled a brief and perhaps clumsy sexual encounter. Just over a minute later, Elena could be seen walking back out of the alley, lighting a cigarette and walking off. She then went into some public toilets and stood in front of the mirror, rubbing her eyes for ages. She got onto her train and headed back to Barrow. This was just an hour or so before the police turned up at her door. She had no injuries to her face at that time that they could see. And although CCTV can only ever show a small amount, something about what she was saying happened just did not seem to be reflected in the footage before them. Ali even sent her a message asking her to add him on Snapchat, hoping to see her again. He told police he thought she was gorgeous and he was happy that he had met her. She told him she was from Wigan and was going to work in one of the nightclubs in Preston, neither of which were true. He said, "I was just calling her to see because I was happy I met her and I was ringing her to arrange to meet her. That's why I called her, because I wanted to see her." The police said from their examination it seemed to be a totally random encounter and he appeared to genuinely quite like her. When she got off the train at Barrow, the story she told the police was that she was then met by two older Asian men who walked her back to her flat where she was brutally raped and attacked again. But the cameras showed her walking alone for a good while before her brother's girlfriend, just as she had said, saw her on the bridge. His girlfriend confirmed that there was no one with her at the time she picked her up and she had no injuries to her face or body. She dropped her home and then called the police right away to let them know she was back. And just 20 minutes later, her face was now bleeding and she was covered in marks. As well as what her brother's girlfriend had told them, her neighbors hadn't seen or heard anything either, and detectives said there was no other conclusion they could draw other than she had done this to herself. But this was such a hard thing to even imagine someone doing to themselves. Everything was moving so quickly and more names were being thrown out. She accused another man named Lee of rape and told people she had a baby boy called Bailey, and even said she spent several weeks in hospital in a coma after being given a backstreet abortion using knitting needles. She had never given birth nor been in a coma in hospital, and all of this could be confirmed by her medical records. Eleanor Williams was finally arrested and charged with perverting the course of justice, and police presented her with CCTV from the Savoy Hotel. She changed her story and said the men in the gang had found out she was informing them, and knowing her life was in danger, she had to hide out in hotels. But when officers pointed out they could just check her flight records to corroborate her story about being trafficked in Ibiza, she admitted that wasn't true. When she claimed Muhammad had trafficked her to Amsterdam to sell her at an auction, she had in fact been in Amsterdam, but with her sister and her sister's boyfriend, sharing a room with them as well. Bank records could put Muhammad in AB and Q in England on the very day she was talking about. With her partial admissions now starting to come out, the court agreed to release Jordan Trinjo, who was still awaiting trial for the 3 counts of rape he was refuting. He was released after being in the sex offenders wing for 10 weeks. He later said prison was disgusting. To be there when you know you haven't done anything wrong is 100 times worse. I was in there with serious criminals. I was put in the sexual offenses population. As you can imagine, it's not a nice place to be. Within a few months, he had to move away from Barrow. I thought it would end the first day we moved in and I had someone shout rapist at me. It was clear then that no matter where I went, someone would always know. I was barred from everywhere. Eleanor was let out on bail and went back to her mom's. She was given a strict curfew and almost a year would pass while the police continued to compile their case. We now find ourselves back where we started today's episode, in May 2020. On the 19th of May, Eleanor's family reported her missing again. She had now been reported missing more than 30 times in just 1 year. Officers finally found her late one evening, standing in a field dressed in all black with her hood up, carrying a rucksack. She was talking very fast and was agitated. As they got closer, they could see she was covered in blood, with black eyes, and the tip of one of her fingers was almost cut off. As she sat in the back of the police car, she said she had been dragged into a car and taken to a house where she was beaten and raped by 10 Asian men. These were the most extreme injuries they had seen so far, and she was taken to hospital. As soon as the sun rose, police were back in the field. They found her in looking for any more clues. They quickly found a hammer covered in blood, which they took in for testing. Her injuries were so brutal they were hard to look at, and some pictures we have not even included. But these would be the pictures she would upload to Facebook a day later. Pictures which would go viral and start to unravel the chain of events we find ourselves in. Detectives said they were watching someone take things to such a point she could have ended up taking her own life. She was clearly extremely troubled. She was drinking a lot, taking drugs like spice and cocaine, running away and allegedly making attempts to end her own life. She had broken her bail conditions. They were able to rearrest her. Little did they realize that while she sat in custody, her Facebook post was spreading like wildfire. Detectives seized a further 8 hammers from her flat and multiple phones. Experts spent time trawling through the vast amounts of accounts and messages. She would largely use Snapchat to talk to people, and with the cooperation of the social media giant, they got access to her Snapchat data. Professor Lee Grant, an expert in forensic linguistics, examined the messages between her and her alleged attackers, and he said he found a significant similarity between the words and phrases in all the disputed messages. He concluded that she had written them all herself. Between October and December 2019, she was chatting to someone she knew from school called Harry Cooper. They had been flirting over messages, and when the messages became more sexual, she changed his contact information to Exaram. Someone she told the police was a trafficker attempting to groom her. She later changed his info again to Exrami, so when Harry called her, she could show it to the police and say it was Muhammad making the calls. She wrote herself letters pretending to be Muhammad as well, acting as if he were writing to her to apologize for the things he had done. Snapchat data could also confirm that Jordan Trenjo's alleged Snapchat account, Trenj7, was created by Eleanor. Another phone which was registered to Elena's address was used to create an account under the name Rollo Kelsey, someone she completely made up and also claimed was a trafficker. Another account under the name Salza was also created by her. In early July of 2019, she used another mobile phone which had been given to her by a Barrow charity which supports female victims of violence and sexual abuse called Women's Community Matters. She used this phone to send messages purporting to be another victim caught up in the trafficking ring, someone called Nicole. Every single allegation she had made, police could pick apart, either using phone data or CCTV. Testing on the hammer also came back, and was only one person's DNA on there, Eleanor Williams. A pathologist concluded that her injuries were consistent with self-inflicted blows using her right hand. They were also able to find CCTV footage which showed her purchasing the hammer that was found in the field, and which also confirmed she had been on her own the whole time. A 10-week trial would begin in October 2022, and it was complex to say the least. Dr. Lucy Bacon, a forensic psychiatrist who assessed Eleanor many times, diagnosed complex post-traumatic stress disorder resulting from childhood trauma. She said she displayed all of the key symptoms, including suicidal ideation and substance misuse. She said she suspected undisclosed sexual abuse in childhood and social services being involved in the home until she was 8, although the ins and outs of this are not known. Dr. Martin Locke was on behalf of the prosecution, and he said he was not able to diagnose Eleanor with any psychiatric disorder, But Dr. Lucy Bacon suggested this may have been because he was male and that Eleanor had refused to engage with some male healthcare professionals in prison. A big part of the prosecution's evidence was the hammer and the self-inflicted wounds. But in court, Eleanor denied hitting herself with anything, saying, "I'm not a psychopath." The jury took just 3.5 hours to find her guilty of 8 counts of perverting the course of justice, and unusually for the UK, her sentencing was televised. 22-year-old Eleanor Williams was eventually jailed for 8.5 years and is first eligible for parole in 2027. A petition to extend her sentence was rejected, as was Eleanor's appeal against her own sentence. Through an apology letter to the judge, Eleanor partially admitted her lies, saying she had done wrong on some of this and added that she wasn't thinking straight when she made the Facebook post. Allison, Eleanor's mom, said, "The order says Ellie was a victim of exploitation and trafficking from the age of 12. Personally, I don't believe that because I think as her mother I would have known something was happening to her at such a young age, but to us, her family, it says she was telling the truth, that she was a victim in the way that she claimed to be, and as her mother I believe her. There were some things she claimed that I do believe were not true. There were parts of it that she made up. I also don't believe that Ellie inflicted those injuries on herself. She couldn't have caused them. There is so much people still don't know about Ellie and what she has been through. They would think differently if they knew." The more than £20,000 that was raised via online funding was intended to be used to pay for a private prosecution of her alleged attackers. After outraging questions about where the money had gone, Allison said that £13,000 had been donated to 2 homeless charities. But Shane Yarrell, who organized the appeal, said he had launched legal action to recover the money, with just over £7,000 having been returned to him by his bank following an anti-fraud claim. He transferred $3,600 to the Barrow-based Furness Multicultural Community Forum and gave the same amount to the James Bulger Memorial Trust. Ellison was also suspended by the Labour Party. There were also calls for stricter rules to be put in place when it came to social media. Some of her posts were viewed over 100,000 times, which made it very hard for the police to put a stop to things and also dissect the truth from the lies. However, we all know that the internet moves at a rapid speed, and in the space of a few minutes, something can be on the way to going viral. Once it's out there, and it's very hard to put the jack back in the box, so to speak. The Online Safety Act 2023 was created to regulate online speech and media and referenced Eleanor's case. It gives the relevant Secretary of State the power to designate and suppress or record a wide range of speech and media that is deemed harmful. Cumbria police said they had to deal with more than 150 crimes in the aftermath of Eleanor's Facebook post, 83 of which were classed as hate crimes. Doug Marshall was the senior investigating officer on the case, and he described this as a disgusting state of affairs. There is still so much speculation about what possibly possessed her to do something like this. Everything from wanting to copy films or TV shit seen like Taken or the BBC drama Three Girls, which was actually based off real-life events, to the effects of drugs and alcohol, to just thriving off of having the police hang on her every word. One of the investigators said she just had a desire to be believed. She desperately wanted to be believed. It is easy to see why a post like that blew up in the way that it did. Seeing those photos coupled with that caption would undoubtedly upset and shock anyone who saw it. People put themselves in her shoes, looked at her as if she was their daughter, their friend, their sister, and it struck such a nerve in the community, and eventually the whole of the UK. It is impossible for most people to even contemplate thinking of fabricating something like that, let alone saying these lies out loud and watching them play out in such a frightening way. The police spent years looking into these claims and trying to catch the people responsible for what they believed was organized crime on a huge scale. They weren't just fighting for Eleanor, they were fighting for the 60 girls she claimed were being affected by it too. This took up an unbelievable amount of man-hours and thus took time away from other people that needed real help and real-life-altering situations that needed to be looked into. And the men that found themselves accused of some of the most appalling things you could ever be accused of, what they went through is unimaginable and will stay with them forever. Mohammed lived in fear, walking around streets where everyone's heads would turn and stare. He said, "Absolutely ruined me, to the point where I smashed a bottle on my head. I wanted to kill myself because of the damage it did. The reputation I'd made was ruined." Jordan was much the same and said, "I tried killing myself over it. I got diagnosed with complex PTSD because of it all. He became a father in August 2021, but says he struggled to bond with his son as her trial kept getting postponed. Ali stopped working and studying after the accusations and spent a lot of time seeking treatment for mental health issues. And Cameron said the abuse he got online was so bad, he was scared to pick his son up from nursery because of what might happen to him. Even men that had not been named by Ellen have found themselves watching over their shoulder as they walk down the street, and still feel the aftermath today. Sajid lived in Barrow most of his life, and he said the impact on the Asian community there was unlike anything he could have ever imagined. After the Facebook post went viral, Sajid's trade dropped by 95% almost overnight. Another local man named Adil also ran a takeout and lost tens of thousands of pounds in revenue. He had to take out a loan and borrow money from family and friends just to get by. He said people just looked at him differently. Even customers that came back looked at him differently. The impact of this on people that had suffered abuse was also massive. One of Eleanor's friends who had suffered years of abuse herself said reading Eleanor's post gave her the courage to tell her own story, and the betrayal she felt when the truth came out broke her heart. She said it was like a domino effect. Everyone was coming forward to tell their story, to make her feel like she wasn't alone. The last thing we wanted to do was not believe her because we know what it's like to not be believed. Maggie Oliver used to be a detective and played a pivotal role in the Rochdale grooming gang case. She was so appalled at how the Rochdale case had been handled that she eventually resigned from Greater Manchester Police and became a whistleblower to expose the poor handling of the case by her own team. She now runs a foundation for abuse survivors and said that this case had left her feeling saddened. When Eleanor first made her allegations, Maggie had supported her family and referred them to the Center for Women's Justice. She said, about all the victims and survivors throughout the country who are now feeling uncomfortable and wondering are they going to be believed or will they come forward. One detective who worked on his case reiterated this and said the thought of what happened in this isolated incident putting real victims off coming forward was very upsetting, and he hoped this would not be the case. Adil said, we were branded guilty before any real evidence had come out. We were tried and found guilty by social media. And one question that will always remain in this case is why. Wendy Eaton was born May 26, 1959 to Joan and Roland. At the age of 15, she was in the 10th grade at Pinecrest High School and lived on Moccasin Trail in Media, Pennsylvania. She was described as a good student, enjoyed scouting, camping, and church activities, and excelled at playing the piano and the guitar. On May 17, 1975, her parents left to go play golf at a local country club, and she stayed home to sunbathe on the roof outside her bedroom window. She was very interested in religion and planned to attend a singing group rehearsal at her church that night. Wendy spoke to a friend later in the afternoon and said she planned to walk to a store to purchase a gift for her older brother Richard. 5 witnesses saw Wendy 3 blocks from her home about 3 p.m. at the intersection of Indian Lane and Media Station Road headed towards downtown Media. She would vanish into thin air and was never seen again. Bloodhounds were able to track her scent to this intersection where she disappeared, but there was no trace of her elsewhere, and police believed that's where she was taken or picked up by a vehicle. In early January 1976, 3 teens were charged with extortion after they tried to collect a $10,000 payment from Roland for information about Wendy's disappearance, which they did not have. On May 17, 2021, 46 years later, police were searching and digging in the wooded area behind a home at the intersection she was last seen. The intersection is the same spot where search dogs stopped and sat down while following Wendy's scent from her bedroom, hours after her disappearance in 1975, indicating the spot where their trail had gone cold. This is not the first time they've been seen searching that area, and it's unclear what information led them back here, but they indicated that they have significant new evidence that she was indeed murdered. Wendy's mother, Joan, died in 1995. Her father, Roland, died in 2007 without closure, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Alan Briscoe Jr. was born December 5, 1969 to Joanne and Alan Briscoe, and his friends would later call him Squeak or Squeaky. In 1985, at the age of 16, he was a student at Bartram High School, lived in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and loved to play basketball and listen to rap music. It was the holidays and his mother was working 2 jobs to make extra money. Each morning, she would call home to make sure he and his sister, 17-year-old LaTanya, were getting ready for school. However, at 7:30 a.m. on Friday, December 13th, neither of them answered her call. She tried again at 3:30 p.m., an hour after school was out, and still no answer. When she arrived home from her second job at 11:30 p.m., she discovered LaTanya had come home but was locked out because Alan had the house keys that day, so she had gone to her grandmother's house. It's unclear why she also didn't answer the routine wake-up call that morning and has refused to talk about her brother's disappearance. In a panic, Joan began calling her friends and family to help her search for her son, and neighbors even joined in on the search that night. As the sun came up, there was still no sign of Alan, and that's when Joan called the police to report him missing. Investigators learned that Alan's school closed early on the day he was last seen. While his mother doesn't believe he ever attended school that day, it is reported that he was there at least part of the day. However, details on what Alan might have done that day remain somewhat murky, but it is believed that he and a friend rode the subway around Philadelphia all day, then came back to their own neighborhood by bus. Alan's friend stated he last saw him exiting the bus at Woodland Avenue, and Alan told him he was going to see a female friend. While talking to police, Joan recalled that there was one teenage boy that she had never liked and had warned Alan to stay away from him. He lived near the area where Alan was last seen after getting off the bus, but there was no evidence linking him to Alan's disappearance. It's also unclear who Alan intended to visit that afternoon. No one has ever admitted to seeing him after he walked away from the bus stop that day. Authorities don't believe Alan ran away from home. He left all his clothes behind, as well as $50 his mother gave him as a birthday present, and he had not spoken of any plans to leave home. There was some speculation that his case could be related to that of Christine Green, another Bartram High School student who went missing in April of 1985, but they have never been able to confirm any links between the two cases. Christine was also 16 years old when she went missing, but it is unclear if she and Alan knew each other as they were not in the same grade at school. Police believe that the cases could possibly be connected since their disappearances were only 8 months apart, but they lack any firm evidence to support this theory. Years later, a Southwest Philadelphia woman who saw an age-enhanced composite of Alan called the police to say that her boyfriend looked a lot like him. However, the man told police that he was not Alan Briscoe Jr. and was not very cooperative. Alan has never been located, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.